So, but it sounds like we should go ahead and get started. Viren, you want to kick us off?
Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to start with, Kitty, I'm going to hand it over to you because you have had conversations with Pam and Maria.
Sure. Okay.
Yes.
So then before we even get started, just a couple quick things about our task force. So just in case you've stumbled into this Zoom unintentionally, this is the Social and Racial Justice Task Force of Community Board 4. This is our monthly meeting. The agenda and other things are available. And in fact, we'll be putting some of that up later. But we are recording our session this evening, as Jessie Bodine mentioned. We will have an opportunity to have people ask questions. First, it will be our task force members who can ask questions of our speakers. And then we can also check to see if any of our members of the public would like to ask questions. And we are live streaming on YouTube right now on Community Board 4's site. So with that, I will actually go to our first agenda item, which is a celebration of Women's History Month. And so we started to give some thought to women in our district who have done some great things. And so first, I would like to turn it over to our Community Board 4 public member, Pamela Wolfe, who is going to tell us about two women who are actually no longer with us, who are deceased, but from our district who were pretty extraordinary women. And then we're going to talk to a woman who's actually still with us and indeed on our call this evening. And we're going to hear from Maria Guzman, who is the president of a tenants association, has done other extraordinary work. So first, Pamela, over to you.
Well, hi, thank you. This came as a surprise, this request, and I've had little time to prepare, but I appreciate the concept and delighted to have a chance to talk about these people. Maria, a question for you. Do you remember Jane Wood?
You're on mute.
Maria, unmute yourself, honey.
I said I sure do. I worked with Jane for quite a long time.
I knew that.
She's a good mentor.
I'm just trying to draw you out on the subject.
Yes.
I worked not with her, but alongside her in a number of things having to do with in the neighborhood. Jane was an incredible tenants' rights activist. She was a tiny woman, but a very large presence.
Yes.
She was. I prepared just something to read about her because I can't really. I'm not very good at extemporaneous. But first of all, I knew her through our block association, and the reason was because we were blessed with many tables. We had 15 5-foot-long folding tables that we used for our block fair and for other events, and she knew that. So when she would have the street fair on 17th Street, I would get every year a phone call from Jane Wood saying, "My dear, could we borrow your tables for our event?" So that was our real connection, not having to do with housing issues, but it was
borrow tables from us too.
That's right. It went both ways, but that was our connection in that sense. She also was very involved in occupying houses, in squatting. And
yes.
I live on 21st Street between 7th and 8th Avenues, and the building across the way from me on the south side of the street in the night, I can't remember what years these were. Maybe Maria, you were there.
That was probably in the 90s.
In the 90s, was it?
Yeah.
That there was a
like 94, 95, I believe.
The group took possession. The buildings were 222 and 222 and 224 West 21st Street.
That's right.
And there was a sit-in and a squat-in, and it went on for quite a while, and it was very impressive. Yep. And I had the catbird seat to observe what was going on there because my windows on the second floor directly across the way.
I got to sit with Jane.
Yeah, that's right. That was quite something. I thought it was earlier. There was the police finally moved in the dead of night and dragged everybody out. And there was a woman who was pregnant, and she wound up giving birth on 7th Avenue in an ambulance. They dragged her out of that house and out into the street, and she was in labor. It was a pretty big event. Anyway, I'm going to read a little bit about her if it's okay with you guys.
Sure.
This is from her obituary from the New York Times. She died in 2004. Jane Wood, longtime tenant advocate and political radical in New York, who once pressured her landlord to replace a broken elevator by sleeping on an air mattress in the lobby, died on Wednesday at her apartment in Manhattan. She was 96. Ms. Wood died of respiratory complications stemming from a fall. She fractured a rib. Considered a giant in the tenants' rights movement, Ms. Wood was credited by housing advocates for helping to prevent the eviction of hundreds, if not thousands, of tenants as her Chelsea neighborhood became gentrified. We all know about that, I guess.
Yes.
She was founder of the Chelsea Coalition on Housing, an advocacy group for low-income tenants, and could always deliver a rousing speech at tenant protests, rent guidelines board meetings, or neighborhood rallies. Ms. Wood was one of the last of a breed of activists whose social sensibilities were shaped by the Depression, though not through personal deprivation. She was born into a family of means, a world she eventually rejected to help the downtrodden. After moving to New York City in the 1930s, she became active in socialist causes and tried to help the poor. She felt that what she saw was terrible, and she felt that she had to do something for those less fortunate. I'm going to skip over here because I don't want to take too much time. Ms. Wood founded the Chelsea Group in the late 50s. In the 50s, after protesting plans to build the Penn Station, it says Penn Station South, it means Penn South, middle income cooperative, the complex ultimately went up, but Ms. Wood helped to ensure that the low income workers who lost their homes were given priority in the new housing. Well, I can tell you they were also given priority all over the neighborhood. There was a program that she forced the city into creating, which had to do with any vacant apartment in a building that a landlord was willing to sign up in the program would be offered first to relocate tenants from the Penn South buildings. That whole area where Penn South is now looked originally just like the rest of Chelsea. It was all five-story old law tenement homes that were built in the 1880s through the 1915, 1917 or so. And all of that housing was stock where they were all rent controlled. People like me and the rest of the neighborhood lived in the same kind of housing. In the building I live in now, a number of the tenants who were here for generations, and some still are in third generation, came from that source, people who were relocated from Penn South. In the 90s, one of Ms. Wood's notable fights involved the eviction of several women who lived at Leo House. I don't know,
Right.
You remember
Yes.
Leo House, that battle?
Oh, yes.
It was a women's residence affiliated with Catholic Charities. The Leo House ultimately won the fight. The evictions were stalled for several years. I was on that picket line. Chris Quinn was among us, and Jane. It was an interesting bunch of people to get together. In 2001, Ms. Wood staged what may have been her most colorful protest, sleeping in the lobby of her apartment building to pressure her landlord to hasten the replacement of the elevator, which at that point had been out of service for months. She installed an air mattress in the lobby and went to bed there in a nightgown and a cap. That's all I have on that one.
There's the picture of her at Gottfried's office.
Yes, there is, and I have a copy of that picture right here. I don't know if you can see it; it's tiny.
Yeah, that's the picture.
That's the picture. Did everybody get a chance to see it?
Yeah, that's lovely.
She
Wow.
was in a white nightgown with, I think it was little
It was one of those granny
roses
gowns.
or granny gown with the little hearts all over it or
Yes.
something. And she set up
Yes.
camp, and she of course invited the press. She was no fool. And,
Absolutely.
And wasn't she in her 90s at that point?
She was 94, I think, or maybe, yeah, she was 94. She died
Good
at
for her.
96. She hung on for a little while.
Lovely.
Anyway, I think I've pretty much covered that subject. She was a treasure, but she
Yes,
was
she was.
she was like a piranha. She'd grab onto things and just not ever let go. She was a force of nature, and everybody loved her. Except
And you could never
for those
say
who
no.
really hated her. Everybody loved her.
I think
Yeah,
just
they could not
landlord.
say no. Anyway, the other person that I wanted to talk about is someone that nobody knows. Nobody ever heard of her, really. Let me find the right pieces of paper here.
And I will say, it's true that I think very few people heard of her, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg cites her as one of her.
Exactly. So you did
yeah.
a little homework on Dorothy.
Exactly.
I'm talking about a woman named Dorothy Kenyon. She was a judge. She was an activist, a huge activist. Gloria Sukanic spent a good bit of time with her and got involved with the coalition through her. Maria, you can speak to that too.
Probably.
You remember Gloria? Gloria from Penn South with the
Gloria with the white hair, yes.
With the incredible hair.
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're just gossiping
We call
here.
her Q-tip Gloria. That was just, and she knew it because we said it to her as well. And she identified with it. Gloria was always running around with a stack of flyers under her arm, inviting you to some meeting or some rally or something that was going on in Chelsea or Penn South. And she was another force to be reckoned with. She was always with Jane. Jane and Gloria were very close and worked really hard together. And I learned a lot from them in my beginning, my first years.
I knew that you would be able to.
They dragged me everywhere. Couldn't say no.
I'm going to just read from some text for you about Dorothy Kenyon. She was born in 1888 and she lived till 1972. She was a New York attorney, a judge, a feminist, a political activist in support of civil liberties. During the era of the McCarthyite persecution, she was accused of being affiliated with 28 Communist front organizations. She was a charismatic speaker and she regularly traveled throughout the US lecturing about civil liberties, the law, and women's equality. She lived on 21st Street at 421. Is anybody familiar with the building?
Yeah, I know the building. I don't remember the address.
Yeah, that's it, 421. It's a tall building in the middle of the block opposite the seminary.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble.
Yeah.
I went offline, but I'll be right there.
Okay. She was born in New York City. She lived on the Upper West Side. She grew up on the Upper West Side. She graduated from Horace Mann. She studied economics and history at Smith. And then after Smith, she went to New York University Law School. She said that she felt that her years basically in high school and in the early college were misused, that she spent them as a social butterfly. But then she went and spent a year in Mexico and observed poverty and injustice at close range and decided to focus on social activism. She graduated from NYU Law School in 1917 and was immediately admitted to the bar. She began her legal career she served in a bunch of different law firms before going on to opening her own firm with a partner. For most of her career, she devoted a great deal of her energy to advocating for social justice and a variety of liberal and progressive causes, such as the New Deal, women's rights, the labor movement, consumer cooperatives. She established the law firm of Strauss and Kenyon with Dorothy Strauss, with whom she worked in partnership for women's advancement, and until 1939, when she became a justice of the municipal court. She was appointed as a member of the City Controller's Council on Taxes for the relief of the unemployed in 1934. What a time that must have been to be doing anything of that sort in law. In 36, she chaired a committee to study procedure for women's courts, where she called for more sympathetic treatment of sex workers and stronger prosecution of their clients and pimps. She gained national prominence as a feminist activist in 1938, when she was named the US representative to the League of Nations Committee for the Study and of the Status of Women, all caps. It was a group of 7 lawyers charged with studying women's legal status internationally. World War II interrupted it, but it didn't go anywhere apparently. But then she worked as a US delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women from 1946 to 1950. Yeah. Already well known in academic, legal, and political circles, in 1950, Dorothy Kenyon made national news when Senator Joe McCarthy named her as the first person to be investigated by the Tidings Committee. McCarthy alleged that Kenyon had been a member of 29 Communist Front organizations. Kenyon responded aggressively to McCarthy's accusations by declaring, and here's the quote, "He's a low-down worm, and although it ought to be beneath my dignity to answer him, I'm mad enough to say that he's a liar and he can go to hell." That's pretty potent.
Wow.
Yeah, for a judge.
Yeah.
Of her involvement with communist organizations, she said, and I quote, "I am not and have never been a supporter of, a member of, or a sympathizer with any organization known to me to be, or suspected by me to be, of being controlled or dominated by communists," end quote. She was ultimately, subcommittee cleared her of the charges against her, but that was kind of the end of her career as a judiciary. She went on to fight for getting women to be able to be on juries, and that was her big battle of her life. And she accomplished it. And that was what Ruth Bader Ginsburg admired most about her, and felt that she was her mentor, was because of that. I think I've talked enough, you guys.
Pamela, wait.
So great. Yeah, Maria?
Quick question. Can you just repeat her name?
Dorothy Kenyon, Kenyon.
Thank you.
Sure.
And the first woman was Jane Wood.
Yeah.
Jane Wood.
Yeah. So
19th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues is Jane Wood Way. And there is a sign on the street lamp on the corner at 8th Avenue and 19th Street that says that, Jane Wood Way.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for letting us sort of in on some of that history, because you're right, it's so important that we know about these kinds of women. So yay, thank you, Pam.
I would not have known, I would never have heard of Dorothy Kenyon were it not for the fact that she lived in the 400 block, and she was close friends with a close friend of mine.
Oh, wow.
Who was a bunch of years younger than she, but they were very close friends. And I used to hear a lot about her from this friend whom I just spoke to earlier today, because I couldn't remember the address and I wanted to be able to tell you what building she lived in.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And now Maria Ortiz, can you tell us a little bit about Maria Guzman? And then we'll hear from her.
All right, let's see. So Maria Guzman is the next woman we're recognizing in our district. We're celebrating Maria Guzman for her advocacy and work in the community. Maria has been the TA president Tenants Association president for Harborview Terrace for the past 40 years and recently retired from her post as Director of Constituent Services with Assembly Member Dick Gottfried, whom she worked with for 33 years. More personal about Maria is that Maria Guzman came to live in Hell's Kitchen when she was 6 years old, when her mother moved the family, meaning her mother, her brother, and herself, Maria, from Puerto Rico and moved to Hell's Kitchen. And Maria has been here for nearly 60 years. In that time, she was married, divorced, raised 3 children on her own, living at Harborview Terrace, which she says, quote, saved my life. The rent was affordable for her and her children. Our children are our legacy. And I know that Maria would like that I mention how proud she is of her 3 children. She has 2 sons, David, who unfortunately passed in a car accident, another son, Joey, who's an elevator mechanic, and her daughter, Tatiara, who's the mother of 5 and a physician. So Maria, thank you for being here tonight with us and all of the work that you've done. I didn't really get into all of the work that you've done, but I'm gonna ask you some questions and then you can throw it in there. Given your life experience and work here in Hell's Kitchen, I have a few questions for you. And the first one is, can you tell us about a time that you were dealing with a community issue that appeared to have no solution in sight, but eventually there was a resolution, and how that was achieved?
Maria, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was probably in my late teens, and I lived on West 57, 475, where the Aurora sits today. Familiar with that building?
Yes.
Not.
57 and 10th.
Yes.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so I lived there on West 57, and our building was abandoned by the landlord. And, you know, in those days, landlords ran away and left buildings alone. We had no electricity, no power, no heat. We had rats and mice, and it was just deplorable. And that was my first tenant fight. And, you know, I was in my teens, I was young. And I went to housing conservation coordinators. I knew of them, and they helped us organize our building. And, you know, we were able to at least restore services so we could stay there a little while longer while we helped tenants make applications to other buildings and move out. Making sure that at least all the tenants were moved in the neighborhood. Some were moved into Harborview, like myself. Some were moved into Amsterdam houses and other affordable housing in the neighborhood. So I think that was my first real tenant fight. As a consequence, I had a few jobs in between, but I went to work for housing conservation coordinators. And Bob Kalin was my boss. And you all know Bob Kalin from HCC. And I was the director of the Clinton Housing Inventory Program that unfortunately got defunded, and I worked there for about 2 years. And the purpose was to make a database of all the buildings in Hell's Kitchen and in Clinton. We wanted to know how many buildings, who owned the buildings, what condition the buildings were in, how many violations they had, how many were being managed by whom and whatnot. So we did a lot of work, and unfortunately couldn't see it through. And then that's where I met Assembly Member Gottfried, and I went to work for him. And I stayed there for 33 years doing the good work that he does and his staff does. And, you know, I usually call ourselves the Promise Keepers, because he makes the promises and we make sure he keeps them, and we help him keep the promises. So, we do what he wants us to do, and he's a good man, and we did good work. I met Jane, I met Gloria, I met, people in Clinton and in Hell's Kitchen as well. I met a lot of good people who work with us. We were able to save a lot of tenants from eviction, keep tenants home, make sure landlords were locked up when they were illegal evictions. That's what we did mainly in the office, make sure people got health insurance and, kept their insurance going on and so forth.
Speaking of those positive things that you're talking about that really impact people's lives, I wanted to ask you, what's the greatest positive change or improvement you've seen over time in the district?
That's a really hard question, because I look at this neighborhood and I'm always saddened to see how the neighborhood has changed. I've lived here all my life, especially when it was a crime to go anywhere west of 10th Avenue because of all the things that were going on. And, I see the progress, and I'm very happy for some of the progress. I'm happy for the rebuilding of a lot of buildings that were made affordable, but I also saw a lot of people move out because they couldn't afford it, because their median income was not what they were saying. So, it was kind of a bittersweet reality. I remember when I could go to any single store in the neighborhood, from West 57 all the way down to 40th, and I knew every single store owner, and I knew who owned it, and they knew me. So I felt safe. I knew all the good people, but I also knew the bad people, the ones everyone was afraid of, the ones who took care of me because I took care of them. So I think, our greatest improvement has been a lot of the work that we did along with Joe in preserving a lot of these buildings to remain affordable housing. That's why I always call Joe my hero.
Joe Riscuccia.
Yes, Joe Riscuccia. And I know a lot of people sometimes don't feel the same way, but I've known Joe so long, and I've seen the kind of work he does and how passionate he is about doing what he does and saving all these buildings, even against all odds. He's helped us here at Harborview. Otherwise, we would probably have been taken over already because of the neighborhood we live in, the kind of building this is, and even the conditions we've been able to keep the building in, which is a lot better than most public housing developments.
Yeah.
And the city wants to sell us off, sort of, and, sell off our remaining land. And we fought hard to keep it and fight the city, saying, no, we're not going to do it. And, come hell or high water, we're going to fight till the end. And I always say, I may not win, but I'm going to go down fighting.
Yeah. I like that. Maria, so it sounds like you're saying with the gentrification in the community that there's been pros and cons to it, but I think you're saying the thing that's been the greatest or had the most positive impact is that we've kept a lot of affordable housing.
It's the rebuilding of all those burned down buildings, vacant buildings, and abandoned buildings, because in the late 80s and 90s, landlords were walking away like, crazy. And all these buildings were being left alone. And that's how, a lot of us were sort of born, because we started working with these buildings. We started working with these tenants, and that's how now you have all these buildings that are affordable. The $250, co-ops that we now have. And, all over 10th Avenue and Hell's Kitchen that was mainly all the work we did.
Okay. And two more questions for you. One is, tell us what concerns you the most about our district and this time, and what you believe could be a possible solution or how to improve that issue.
It's along the same lines for me. It's the loss of community. It's the loss of, people knowing each other and working together. If I had to get a group of people this week to have a rally to do something important for this neighborhood, I would have a very hard time. And I didn't have that hard a time 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So for me, that's something that's really sad. All these towers going up with all this luxury buildings that are not affordable. I don't care what they say, but they're not affordable. The medium, it's not, reflective on a lot of people that live here. So I see all these people moving out, and that breaks my heart.
And what do you think can improve that issue, which you see as the greatest issue?
Well, believe it or not, I think now with the pandemic and COVID and the fact that there's so many people that left the city and so many landlords out there that are desperate, there may be some room to negotiate some of those income guidelines and, work with those rents. And I, think about that at night sometimes, how maybe, we can work with them because they don't want to lose their buildings and we don't want to lose our tenants. So what do? We meet somewhere in the middle or a little bit over to the other side where people would get the same apartment for a little more and keep it that way, at least for a while, sort of a rent control after COVID.
Okay. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to ask you, tell us about a woman from our community that inspired you or whom you greatly admire.
Okay. Well, we already talked about Jane Wood, and she was one of mine. Because of Jane, I slept on the street. I slept on a cardboard box. She dragged me to places I don't even want to remember. But that was Jane, and we did what Jane asked us to. But I worked a lot also with women in Clinton, also known as Hell's Kitchen. And I have that fight sometimes with people that won't recognize that there is a Clinton along with Hell's Kitchen. And it's really the same, but there's a line. And that was Mary Delia and Evelyn Regino, who lived at Hudson View. And Evelyn was the woman that started the 9th Avenue Food Festival because she was working with the merchants along 9th Avenue to help improve business and whatnot. And Evelyn was a very interesting woman. She was rude, nasty, and a lot of people didn't like her. And she didn't like me at the beginning. And, I would say in today's day and age, she was a racist. She told me she wasn't going to work with some Spanish girl who didn't know anything.
Oh.
So, it took a while, but I never, sit back. I have a mouth that my mom always told me would get me killed one day. Hopefully not. And eventually Evelyn started working with me. And one day called me to the side and said, I'm really sorry. And please forgive me. And she gave me a big doll. She used to sell dolls. She gave me this huge doll as a token of her, being so sorry for what she told me. So Evelyn, in spite of all that, did a lot of good work. But Mary Delia did a lot more. Mary used to work for the mayor's office. And then she started working with Jesse, help me here, because my mind, I'm getting old. She was running the Clinton Preservation, something or other.
Yeah,
And
I don't know.
it was a group of buildings that were the result of the Seckendorf deal and the Madison Square Garden sale. And there was a deal made in the city where Mr. Seckendorf, who was the developer at the time, was going to give us all this money to develop and renovate or upgrade all these tenements. And Mary was running that, and we did a lot of work with her. I can't remember the name of the organization, and I'm really sorry, but Mary ran that. So there's a row of buildings on West 56 between 9th and 10th Avenue. There's another row of buildings on 9th Avenue between 51st, I want to say, and maybe 49th. That were all the result of that. There were some buildings on 10th Avenue as well, and she ran those really well. And she was always there every time I called her. She was a really, really great woman. Mary Delia was someone I looked up to a lot and always ran to and had her on, spit phone dial, because every time I had a problem, I would call her and ask for her advice.
Mary
So those were
Delia?
the three. Delia.
Mary Delia, and who was the other woman? Evelyn?
Evelyn Regino.
Regino.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing with us. My goodness, you have done some extraordinary things in our district and gotten to know a lot of great people.
I've been here a long time. I'm getting old.
And Maria, I see Dale has his hand up, so he might have a question for you. But before he does, just can you remind us what year was Harborview built? When was Harbor approximately?
1975, I think. It was June 1975.
Okay. Okay. And
that's when most of us moved in. A lot of people.
I had another question, but I cannot recall it right now. Okay. So let's go to Dale, and then I see Hector.
Thanks.
Hi, Dale.
Hi. Thanks, Pamela. Thanks, Maria, and thank you for giving us a little bit of your story in the district. I just wanted to give a little context because I'm not 100% familiar with how it came to be, but when you talked about Joe, I think you were talking about the Clinton special zoning.
Oh, well, that was another thing, the Clinton Special District.
Yeah.
That's another issue.
Because, I'll just say that it's really interesting because I wasn't around for when that happened. I believe this was like a deal that was brokered during the Bloomberg administration.
Right.
But a lot of these tenement stock buildings in Clinton have red lines around them, in effect, because of the work of this board to keep them from being demolished and to preserve them as housing. However, lately, the building department has been issuing demolition permits on these buildings. Mm-hmm. So the work has not ended. I mean,
of course not.
Yeah, that was an incredible milestone that Joe and some others in the board at that time had the foresight to say, we need to protect our housing stock with all the,
but it's not over.
With the development mania that was going on at the time. But, inexplicably, we see this every once in a while that the owners warehouse the building, they make deals with the tenants, they get them out, and then they file
they legislate new rules, like if there's one tenant left, you gotta go, and there's no deals. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So I just wanted to provide some context to what some of the story that you were giving us is we're dealing with some of the issues, today.
Again, yeah. I know the fight is not over.
Absolutely.
I'm aware.
We got,
You know, I'm still fighting here at Harvor View as well.
we have to take the
And you
baton.
know, around my neighborhood, I'm not out there as much as I used to be. And I was telling Pam at the beginning, a lot of you may not know, but I was a former MCB4 member, and I was the chair of the housing committee at the time, before I went to work for Dick.
Mhm.
And you know, I know it's hard. It's really hard work, but we can't stop, because if we give up, then there's no one to do it, and we have to train new blood.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because I don't see new blood coming in to take over what we started. And
I'm new blood.
And the Clinton
I see one
Special
right there.
District, it's a really separate issue, which is, although might be related a little bit to preserving housing, this was to preserve the buildings, dimensions, the height content, and you know, the block ratio, and a specific area only. So yeah, I remember that issue really, really well. And it's still helping us a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you again for all your work.
We did, we worked on all that, yes.
Hector.
Did you remember your question, Maria?
Yeah.
I didn't, but Hector has his hand up.
Oh,
Hi, Hector.
no. Hey, Maria. I just wanted to say it's a real pleasure to see you again. Thank you for coming. This lady is a real fixture in a lot of the communities here, even down in Chelsea and a lot of the other meetings throughout the community. And I just want to say thank you, because I know you're actively involved with, you have your hands in a lot of things. And honestly, and you're right, there's a lot of, we need a lot more folks involved, such as yourself, and we're hard pressed to find such talent like you. So I just want to say thanks,
Yes.
and thank you for sharing the history behind everything you do.
I always say I don't sleep on boxes as well as I did 30 years ago. It's not the same.
Oh
Fair
yeah,
enough.
I can only imagine.
And Leslie.
Just a quick thing, Maria. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's great to hear the history of the area. And you know, I know you did great work, so it shows. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess the last thing I'll say is, now I know who else I can be getting mentoring from as co-chair of Housing, Health, and Human Services. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
I'm going to be giving you a call sometimes.
Anytime, you've got the number, and I've got you logged in already. So now I won't ignore your call when you call.
I have a question for Maria,
Sure.
if I may.
Yes.
Before you made a distinction, you said that there's Hell's Kitchen and there's Clinton, and it's
Yes.
kind of all the same thing, but you said there is a line.
There is.
I want to know where the line is.
Okay. West 57th Street
Yeah.
to West 53rd North is Clinton. 53rd South is where Hell's Kitchen begins.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing.
Yes.
I always thought that
Just
it
to
was
add
Hell's.
to that, yeah, Pam, just to add to that, I might be totally wrong, but I think sometimes it's referred to as South Clinton.
That's probably what they call it that. You know, I've always called it Clinton. And, you know, I've had arguments with a lot of people. We did a mural in our development once that's still there. And the guy who did the mural, who's a community person, said, no, it's Hell's Kitchen. And I said, no, I want on the sign that says Clinton Hell's Kitchen. And he was like adamant that there was no Clinton. And I said, well, you're wrong, there is. And I insist, I'm paying for the mural, you write Clinton on it. And he did. But I had to convince him. There is a Clinton.
Well, I'm you know, my images of the album cover of West Side Story,
Oh,
which I always thought was 70 was
But in the 70s, it's the Ansonia district. It's not Clinton.
No, I thought that album cover depicted 56th Street between 9th and 10th.
I think it was the 60th.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah,
So
it was
that-
further
that
up.
Fordham
way-
University stands now.
So that all disappeared with Lincoln Center and all
Right.
of that.
Formerly known Old San Juan. Formerly known
San
as
Juan Hill.
San Juan
Right.
Hill. Thank
That's
you,
right.
Chris.
San Juan Hill.
San Juan
San
Hill.
Juan
That's
Hill,
it.
not Old San Juan.
Thank you,
San Juan
San
Hill.
Juan
San
Hill.
Juan Hill.
Yes.
That I remember too.
All right.
San Juan
Thank
Hill,
you.
yes.
Sorry, I think we're going off track, Katie and Viren. Sorry.
It's great
No
to
worries.
remember.
Maria Guzman, thank you for being here.
Yes,
Thank you
exactly.
all.
Maria,
Maria,
Thank you,
so much.
Maria, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. And listen, NICHA can use some more slipping in the boxes.
Oh, yes. And they do get a
Yeah,
lot
more
of kicking
advocacy.
from us, believe me.
They do.
You should see us when we go to their hearings and barge into their offices.
I'm sure you do.
We're not a quiet bunch.
Good.
That's
Keep
why
up the
we're
good
still
fight.
here. Otherwise, they would have gotten rid of us.
Lovely. Thank you so, so much. This was
You're
really
welcome.
special. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This was great. And now,
And
Viren,
it's
I'll turn
nice
it over to
meeting all
you. For,
these new faces. So I guess a lot of the all board members, except Pam, it's the only one I recognize.
also,
from
but
way
remember,
back
this
when.
isn't our full board. This is just
This is-
one of our
I
committees, so-
understand that, but
Yeah.
all these are new faces to me.
We still got Joe and JD and
I know.
that
Oh,
whole.
I love JD. He's so sweet.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Great.
Okay, bye
I
guys.
love.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Viren, I'll turn it over to you because we're going to have another presentation from a great woman here in our district.
Oh.
So,
Yes.
So can I stay?
of course.
Second agenda item is unfortunately it has to be postponed because we couldn't find people to come in and speak to us about youth employment program. So we're going to move on to the item number 3, and just to sort of give you a little background, Dale actually introduced us to Tamara a while back. It took us a while to invite you over to speak to us because a lot of things were happening last year, as you know, and we were sort of trying to, juggle between different agenda items. Tamara is the community engagement, a chief civic program officer at SHARE. And she's going to speak to us about SHARE's programming and what exactly they're planning to do in terms of community engagement. And this task force focus is pretty much in terms of social and racial justice and how SHARE is actually going to reach out to communities of color beyond the district boundaries, but also within the district. So with that, Tamara, floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you all. It's so wonderful to see so many friendly faces. It's been a super challenging, difficult, uncertain, anxious year. But what keeps me going in a very personal way is feeling that there's a purpose, something greater than oneself. And, the Shed's new in a sense that we celebrated, I think, our first anniversary. Actually, all of us working from home, we had already been shut down. And, it's almost like we were open before. I've been here since 2016 and we did work in the community before, but I actually feel we are born from this moment. We always said, what did it mean to try to build a new cultural center in and of the 21st century? And I kept being like, so what does that mean? Especially in the arts and culture sector that is so defined by some of its inequities. Like it's a very difficult, when we talk about systemic racism, no institution, no organization, no business is immune from that. And so when I was thinking, why would I come work at the Shed? Part of it was like, does this present an opportunity to address some of those inequities and from a very fundamental kind of the DNA of an organization? And so that's what I always wanted to bring to the work that I do. So I'm happy that I'm situated in our programming department. And so I get to work on large scale commissions, on public programs, and youth residencies. But really every single day when I come to work, and what I'm trying to sort of preach in our organization is, well, why do we exist? Who do we serve? Who works here? What's the work that we amplify? How do we try to increase not only opportunities, but outcomes for people that are often considered the margins, but I always hate that framing because I actually feel that's the center. And I think about the diversity and wonderfulness of New York City, but I also think about American history and that how to actually acknowledge the historic systemic issues and the narratives that we're sort of handed down, and to say, actually, there are other stories that we want to center. And so that's sort of what I try to bring to the shed every day, and the team that we're building, my department, Civic programs, but really all the work that we're doing. And, it's never lost on me the context in which the shed exists, the building that we have, and the proximity to developments that we're next to. And there's all of those things are true. But what's also true is, like, what do you do, and how do we all look at the privileges that we have, and what are we willing to share and sort of give up? And so that's sort of the thinking that we do. And we had that first year of programming, and it was very exciting. I actually brought some stats. About 22,000 in our first year came from sort of folks in the local district that came to our programs. But really, I think that we really began in 2020. Because in 2020, when you're faced with all of us and the challenges, it really was about, what do you have to offer? What's the difference you're trying to make? And when you're forced to prioritize, what's that priority list going to be? And they were super difficult conversations, but what was really important was that, so we're a commissioning house, which means that we kind of make new work, as opposed to being a presenter where you kind of see things and then that you like and you bring it back. So there was this sense of making things and working and making sure that artists were working. When we had to shut down, we instantly had to lay off teaching artists. And so those were some of the first people we started thinking about. We had to furlough staff, and then we ultimately had some layoffs. Within a month, it was like, okay, we've shut down, but what can we do? How do you position to the digital space? And so within a month, we had some virtual programming. And we don't have an archives where other people could go back and say, this is what we were doing for the top hits from the past 50 years. So it became about, what does it mean to be a new institution, deeply committed to sort of what are the urgent issues, and that we were actually facing this once in a lifetime kind of humanitarian crisis. And so we actually focused on emerging New York City artists. The majority of them, I think all of them, are BIPOC artists, who we felt financially were being really hard hit, who had health issues as well. And we committed to sort of doing online virtual programming and commission them to do new work, to both reflect on the moment and how to offer healing. And, I've this moment that we were in had us, for the first time, I had to do a funeral very early in COVID, but it was like a Facebook. And I was like, I can't believe we're doing like a Facebook Live funeral. And how does one mourn and when one can't touch? And there are two amazing artists, Troy Anthony, who's actually one of our open call artists, and Justin Allen's another artist. And they basically created a mourning ritual. And I don't know if anyone of you saw it, but there's some artifacts from it. It's a Zoom call. So it's like this, but they led us through a very beautiful and sort of healing mourning ritual where you were able to connect. And they used all the tools that are part of Zoom in which to engage people. And that was pretty early in the pandemic. And what that meant for people who had recently, one of them had actually recently lost a grandparent to COVID, and that's sort of why they wanted to do that. But we were able to talk about the disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities. We were able to center who are the artists that we want to focus on? How do we want to, in every choice that we make, tell a greater story than we're putting out some other kind of virtual content? so we committed to the Up Close program, and we've had about 100,000 views on that. We were able to commission 12 works, but serving 39 artists, and super proud of that work. The other thing was, how can we, that's a very tiny program, it's 12 commissions. What can we do to really think about how hard hit artists were? A lot of them have precarious working situations. Like I said, I was talking to a lot of other cultural colleagues. A lot of teaching artists were laid off immediately. We realized that our open call program that we started, that really is looking at doing a call to have artists that are emerging, New York City based, very early in their career, be able to apply to either be part of a group show in the gallery or to do live performance either in our outdoor plaza space or in our theater space. And what we loved about recommitting to that program, and when you're faced with those, like I said, when a crisis and very limited choices, you're like, what matters? And open call is absolutely going to be a cornerstone for the Shed, because part of it is we devised it when we did back in 2016, which was, how do we break from the impresario model that there's one cultural producer that makes all these choices, that actually none of the, like, it wasn't going to be the Shed making the choices of who's going to be part of this program. What did it mean to democratize art in that way? And to actually say, we're going to have 50 external reviewers decide who should go into panel. And then what does it mean if you have a panel of 20 people, 2 of them get to be Shed people? Like, what does it mean to constantly have shared leadership? What does it mean to constantly not center oneself and to bring in others? That the Shed is actually, we always say that it is on city-owned land, and that more people should be able to be involved in some of those decisions. So Open Call already had that baked into its DNA. And so when we're thinking about, well, what should we commit to when we think about reopening, it was the Open Call program. We felt at some point, are we totally insane here? We're in the midst, I think we opened the call in May. It had been a very tough spring, but what we felt was the hope of, like, there is something that's going to be on the other side of this. What can we learn from this moment, and that people are hurting? And then how do we present as many opportunities as we can? The first time we did Open Call, there were about 900 artists had applied. And I think we did that call in 2018. We doubled that. We were hosting Zoom info sessions, and we were like at max capacity of like 500 people per info session wanting to get information. So it let us know that we were on the right track. What I love about this program is that it absolutely, we want to make sure, and I think someone was talking earlier about how do we make sure that we're focusing on our immediate neighborhood, but making sure that that all of New York City gets to be part of what's happening here at the Shed. And so that became really important. We also did a focus on thinking about disability arts integration and trying to be more open to a variety of artists that get presented. And so in the end, like I said, we had like 1,800 applications. We were only able to sort of accept about 27 of them. Really proud. It's like 100% BIPOC artists. We'll start presenting some of their work this summer, both in the gallery, and we'll be in pavilion style before we nest. And because we weren't able to do all of the work this year, some of the work will actually happen next year. I also want to talk about some of the other exhibitions that we've been doing. And I know some of you, just when you've seen also our Howard Dina Pindell exhibition, Rope, Fire, Water. And I'm bringing these up because I think that when we think about social justice and equity, there's ways in which you look at how you run an organization, what's the process, who's included, and how you think about the marketing of it. And then it's also literally what are the themes and topics that you're talking about, and does art allow for a way for a broad section of people to really get into a topic. And Howard Dina is an amazing leading visual artist. She was one of the first sort of curators of color at MoMA, and she's one of those rock stars who hasn't really had a large scale retrospective really in her hometown. So we were very happy for years working with Howard Dina. But I always say that even though we were planning this for a long time, this exhibition landed kind of right on time. It was very important for her that we did this before the presidential election that we had. So when we were also making decisions of like, wait, should we delay this exhibition? Howardina was like, we absolutely have to do it. It's looking at both the history of racial terror in the United States. It's looking at the history of lynching, not only in the South, but also in the North. And she's also an abstract artist as well. So she did this video work that's very difficult to watch, but it really, in a very kind of slow and deliberate way, takes you through that horrible terror and the history in our country. And then her abstract work is really also a release for her, another way to sort of process these very difficult, this difficult history that we have. Howardina also wanted us to say, this is not just historic, we're very much living in this moment. And we use this as an opportunity to not only do public programs on Zoom platforms like this about the legacy of her as an artist and what that means in our sector, in the cultural sector, but to think about policy. So we had really great conversations. We've talked about housing, where we talked about racial economic justice, and we talked about redlining. We talked about the injustice system and how it's not about being restorative. It's not about justice. It's not about, it's very punitive, and how that plays out. We actually have another talk coming up, I think this Thursday, about representation and participation, because civic engagement, I mean, all of you are right here living civic engagement, but how important that is for all of us to be part of that, no matter what one's status is, and how we hold our elected officials accountable. So it was really important that while we're having these conversations through the art itself, we were actually having direct conversations with thought leaders and policymakers and people, also grassroots activists. Along with that Howardina exhibition, we also wanted to, sometimes we talk about this very difficult history and we try to put either it happens over there, it happens down south, it happens how many years ago. This is very much in New York's history, lynching, racial violence. We worked with the organization called Black Gotham to actually create an audio walking tour, a self-guided walking tour, and then a video tour to actually trace the 1863 race riots that happened in New York. And so the tour takes you through many different stops in Manhattan, very close to us, and also in Brooklyn. And I think you know, the connections between both the violence in our capital. And that day when I was thinking about, you know, time could also just seem like that was just yesterday when you think about both the race riot here and what it means when Black people are at a moment of gaining more of the freedoms that they are entitled to. What is the racial terror and violence that comes back to them? And that we both can learn through that from history and through art, and how we can think about it in our own communities. And before I get into, I want to talk a little bit about some of what it means that we're bringing live performance back. But we were a couple days into a preview of a piece by Claudia Rankin called Help, but I'm not sure if any of you were able to see it, but it was a work. Claudia is an amazing poet and scholar and writer, and she really confronts white privilege and challenges it and calls it out, but really in a way to get to the root of, like, how do we begin to address our history and how white supremacy really shapes all aspects of our society. And she wrote an original piece that was inspired by a New York Times article she did, where she just decided one day, well, what if I were to start asking white men about their privilege? And so from that, we developed that into a play. But we had to, I think we were maybe 3 days into previews when we had to shut down. Again, talking with the team at the Shed and talking with Claudia, there was this, we always programmed this to do it before the national elections. And we felt, okay, performance is shut down. What can we do? We got the team together and then worked on adapting it into a film piece by Philip Guzman, where it both was still taking inspiration from that theater text, but also really then looking at, I always say in the struggles for, when you're in a fight for justice, the power of joy also, like one needs to be totally thinking about their whole selves and how you can, communities of care that enable you to keep a fight going. When I even think about the people that all of you, we were celebrating earlier today, you know, in order to have the energy to fight every day, as we say, these issues are persistent. We need to also take care of each other. And the film November, while also absolutely being very pointed and directed in challenging white supremacy, also was really celebrating what Black joy means, especially in the summer that we had. And so, listen, this is just the beginning. You know, there's so much more for the Shed to be doing, to be both thinking about what social justice means, what it means to be an equitable organization, both in practice, how you work, who works at the Shed, who are the artists that are here, who gets to curate, who comes here. There's many things, but I do feel incredibly proud of the past year that we had, because there was such we weren't able to do everything. There was a real POV and a real perspective about things that we care about, and reflecting on who we care about and who we want to make sure is always part of our community. We're part of the pilot programs for opening up live performance. It's very challenging because, you know, 150 capacity, you know, making the finances for those type of things work is really challenging. But we are feel there's a responsibility to also make sure that we're following health protocols, but really trying to know that culture also drives so much of other economies, and whatever we can do to open the doors back up, we should be doing. So we are doing a sort of 5-part performance series. It's mostly music, but it also has some comedy. It's a wonderful singer, and Kelsey Liu, who actually was part of our Steve McQueen Soundtrack of America performance. The New York Phil will have some performances. We're really happy to have Renee Fleming back, and then the comedian Michelle Wolfe. And so those are performances that will be happening throughout April. In the McCourt space, what's great is that it could seat 2,000 people, but which means that you can have 150 people quite socially distanced in pods. And so definitely trying to do our part there. So when I was invited here, I was like, well, let me talk about the things that we care about, and try to share some of the thinking behind the decisions that we make. But really, I'm very interested to know more about the work that you're doing, how we can partner in really both naming the issues in our communities, and especially where race is so at its core, and whether we know it or not, how we can surface some of those things. And when we think about opportunities and outcomes, and how we can definitely support the local community, and whether that's around working, so whether it's workforce development, whether it's about hiring, is it opportunities for artists? I do think these policy conversations, I've loved doing the public programs. It's a very critical election that we have coming up now. There's different, there's ranked voting. You know, we so want to be able to, and we're actually working on a program in the fall to really think about what are issues that are really important, both to our local community, but really throughout New York City. And how can we make sure that all the new administrations understand the concerns from their constituents. And so I think there's hopefully a lot of opportunities for us to work together and collaborate on some of those things. But I hope that gives you a little taste. I'm happy to answer any questions, and really hope we can roll up sleeves and find ways to work together and learn from each other. Thank you.
Tamara, that was fantastic. The overview was more than I actually could have asked for. You covered a lot of ground, and I think there are going to be a bunch of questions. I was hoping that we would have had more people attending the session, because there is so much that the Shed can actually do in terms of engaging the community within CD4, but even beyond, because I think we have a tendency to define communities in a very sort of different silos, but we are all connected. And like my dad used to say, that our differences define us. They don't need to divide us. And I think institutions like Shed the boundaries are sort of expandable. I mean, a facility like that belongs to the entire city. But particularly in this community, which actually kind of is made to look like homogeneous, it is not. Both in terms of the people who live here and people who work here, people who go in and out of this community, and public institutions actually have a much larger role in that context. So I'm not going to hog up all the time. I'm going to open it up for questions from the members. I see James's hand first.
Hello, Tamara, McCaw. Thank you so much. Your work is really impressive and overwhelmingly positive. And I just want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for coming to the committee and the task force and sharing all the challenges that have been faced. And I apologize, my dog is getting really anxious and leaving. So anyway, that's the world of Zoom. As the task force, and of course, all of us who are on the task force are members of the board in various committees. I was in the land use committee when questions about the shed came up. So I just have a couple kind of quick hit questions and then sort of a more broad overall question. Could you just give us an idea of the budget of the not-for-profit that runs the shed, please?
I think our budget now might be 20-something million, around there.
And how are you funded?
Like most nonprofits, is a mixture of both private funding, foundation funding, corporate funding. You kind of have to.
Do you have just sort of do you sort of have a general, because on WNYC they say the majority comes from members like you. Like, do you know how much of it is like funded?
I don't have that.
Okay.
I don't have that. Like the city basically obviously gave part of the capital for the capital
Right.
stuff. So I'm talking to you about the operating budget. I don't have a direct. I mean, most of it is coming from private. It's from the foundation side. We were a year old, so we don't have like other places, nonprofits. You want to, ideally maybe have 60% earned versus that's not where we're at, because we did a year with an audience and then we were closed. But we need to get there. But and I also do a lot of the free programming. So, but I make sure I help them raise the money for those free programs.
Right.
So.
Just a couple more quick hit questions here. There was supposedly supposed to be a culture shed open space advisory board. And I just looked at the list of the board of directors. I didn't note any members of CB4 on the board. And within the original mandate, there was supposed to be a member of CB4 on the Culture Shed Open Space Advisory Board.
And they are.
Okay.
So there's an open space. We haven't, I think Jess here, we haven't had a meeting because we've also been, but that's on my list to sort of reconvene that, because now we are going to try to obviously nest this summer. You're looking at the board list, and just to clarify, the speaker does have a community board for rep and go represent, use his seat. So we actually do have also representation on the shed board, and then the open space is separate.
Got it. And would you happen to know who's occupying that seat?
For which one?
For Corey.
Inga.
Got it. Okay. And then last question, and this is sort of speaking more broadly to, I think you're accomplishing amazing things for the community, for the city, for communities of color and BIPOC. But, I've been involved in the art industry for about 15 years, and I'm curious, how are the artists compensated, if at all, for their exhibits, and are their costs covered? One of the big issues that I've found over the years is that, artists, end up having to make a lot of sacrifices in order to get exposure, and, exposure doesn't pay the rent, exposure doesn't pay the bills. And so I want to know, has the shed had that conversation internally? Are there policies in place to ensure that artists who, go through a very rigorous selection process ultimately are compensated, like financially?
Yes, absolutely. So everyone gets paid. Like if you're going to, for instance, we even have a Disability Arts Integration Council. Everyone gets paid an honorarium to participate in that. Every commission, no artist no one is working, like there's no volunteer for anyone. Even with the open call program, we don't manage the artist's budget, but like we say you get $15,000 for this work, then SHED covers all the costs for like productions, install, and that kind of things. We do, there's this thing called wage, I'm sure you know about. And so we do sometimes work with artists to make sure that we're like in your budget, you need to make sure that you're paying yourself, but you make sure that you're also paying the other artists. But, and listen, like even for the theater productions, there's many different unions that get represented as well. So some things are set, but I totally hear you. I'd rather do less work and make sure that people are being compensated. That's when you think about your pie. If you have $10, you have $10, but you got to make, you have to make it work, and you need to make sure that you're not hurting. And then that's why when I said like how hurt we were when we had to let the teaching artists go, that's something that's in your head where you're just like, okay, so who when we have the next opportunity with Up Close to start commissioning, who should get that spot? And so we made sure that we were focusing on our teaching artists and focusing on artists of color. So,
well, thank you for demonstrating best practices. I think you can really set the tone for the way cultural institutions in New York treat artists. It's really important that, you know, they be compensated fairly, because you know as well as I do, a lot of these artists will lead with their passion and not their pocketbook, and end up not carving that out. And the last thing I would ask is if you could try and make a more public statement. I really couldn't find anything about, you know, and maybe it is, maybe it's just buried, but you know, Wage is an amazing organization. I'm a huge proponent for artists, and I love that you're paying attention to that. And thank you.
No, absolutely. And part, you know, the way when we talk about it is like we're new, and that we always use a word like there's a family that we're building, and once an artist is part of it, we're always thinking about opportunities. We serve as fiscal sponsors, like we're constantly helping them also identify other funding opportunities for projects that are at the SHED, not at the SHED. You know, once you're in, you're never really out of the family in that for good or bad, whether people like it or not. And so, and you know, listen, I always say the SHED sometimes we don't always do a good job of telling our story, because there is a story out there, and there's other stories that don't really get told. But I'm much more interested in doing the work. And listen, I'm telling you the highlights. There's also lots of places where we're falling short, that we need to do better. As a sector, we need to do better. We need to not be afraid to be very blunt and call things out. You know, the language that we can even use now would freak people out. When we first started doing HELP, you know, every time I would say, you know, white supremacy, white privilege, anti-Black racism, could be really difficult. But part of me was like, I want to do the work, and then we can do statements about them and stuff like that. But
if you could provide your contact information, I need your help, because we're trying to do more outreach and I'm getting some pushback. So I love some lessons learned from you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to share it.
Thank you. Josephine?
This is probably more just a plug than anything. You know, hi, Tamara, and thank you so much for the very extremely important work that you're doing. When I had first heard about the SHED, you know, being in Hudson Yards, it felt so exclusive to me. And I think the first year I didn't even bother going. And then when I saw that Howard Dean and Pindell was there, I thought, oh, okay, let's go see what's happening here. And I have to say, I was completely blown away. And anybody who has not been, I highly recommend it. Not only does she do such an amazing job capturing the civil rights movement, and as you talked about, the terror of living in Black and brown bodies, that she also takes care of us too, right? With her abstract works that are so beautiful. And you could literally just spend hours sitting there looking at it. So it was such a great combination. And I think that ends at the end of this month. But you're also doing great work that's online. The Fighting the Dark. I'm just plugging this because I know you talked about it a little bit, but I hope
Josephine, go, yes.
We'll actually take the time to do this. So Fighting Dark is a walking tour and a video tour. So you can walk to different places in New York City and learn about the draft riots that really affected African American communities here, and that people were actually lynched, right here in CB4 from lampposts. I mean, this is history that I had not, and I went to school and went to college here in New York City, and nobody ever talked about these things. So there is actually a video of the tour, and it's so well worth your time. It's probably like 10 minutes, but will really give you a good idea of the history. Like we talk about all of these things happening in the South, and we never talk about them in New York, and certainly not right here in Manhattan and right here in CB4. So I would highly recommend that. And the only really question that I have for you, Tamara, we've been talking off and on about how can we better reach the schools, especially with information like this. So I'm just wondering, like, overall, you know, I know that you've done work with schools, you know, with your teaching artists, but how do you normally get your information out there about works like Fighting the Dark? Like, what's your normal procedure?
To be honest, like, that is some area that we could really use some support in. When we were doing our sort of youth-based after-school programs, like, we were able to be in a variety of schools, and we were in like community centers. And so there was a way for us both to say, hey, we can partner with your teachers here. We can partner with, you know, sometimes it was the PTA, doing an after school based program, or it would happen during the day. And there was a natural sort of connection. And we were at the height of it, maybe working with almost 700 students. And this was even before we opened. Without those residency programs, it's been a challenge to figure out. And to your point, even Fighting Dark, like we were just emailing about this, like, it would be an amazing opportunity that people can do on their own. They can watch it's 10 minutes of film. There's a lot of amazing other online content that we have as well. And so currently what we've been trying to do is because we don't have sort of teaching artists on staff right now, we don't have sort of a full education department. We've been working with different partners, and whether it's like Culture Pass, we started working with CUNY TV to share some of that virtual content to some of, obviously to their constituents. You know, we just had a meeting with, it's Brooklyn Public Access, but BRIC, to see if we could use their platforms. And so we're trying to get creative, but, you know, Howard Dean is closing now, but we're actually working on a really great exhibition by the artist Tomas Saraceno, which is really looking about climate and air quality and how it disproportionately impacts communities of color, particularly Black and Brown communities. We keep thinking there's all these sustainability coordinators and environmental coordinators in schools. How can we have a partnership to make sure that they are understanding the work that we're doing, and maybe even helping us develop some curriculum? So I would say that is actually an area where we could use some support, because structurally right now, especially where we've had some cutbacks, we're just not being able to do sort of the after school programming that we did before.
Okay, we'll keep talking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Just a related question. Are you partnering with CUNY in any manner?
CUNY and probably NYCHA. CUNY is probably one of our earliest partners. When we were doing the open call the first time around, there was like a $10 application fee. And it was only because the platform required it. And then we didn't know, are we going to get 10 people apply, or is like 100,000? And so we were gonna pass it on. And I'm looking here if James is still here. We were gonna pass it on for artists to apply. And CUNY, who had been with us doing some outreach and really thought partnership, right? Thank you, James. Was like, do you know the average income of CUNY? I mean, they just broke it down in the most beautiful, loving way. And then we created a code that would basically zero that out. But that was the beginning of our relationship. We're actually doing a CUNY day. I think a bunch of SHED staff is basically doing with the Culture Corps that they work with, which is placing students in different arts and cultural nonprofits. So we're doing like a whole day where I'm getting a bunch of the SHED staff to basically do classes, seminars, like lunch and learns. CUNY helped host for Open Call. We did a special info session for CUNY students. And so they are probably one of the most foundational partners. And so we should I'm happy for us to talk more about that. We also have a ticket access program, I think, which ranges from like free to $10, but I think every NYCHA student can go for free. Every NYCHA resident can go for free. Every CUNY student can go for free. So there's they're longstanding partner, and we only want to just deepen that.
Right.
Forward.
The reason why I asked you is that I teach at CUNY and I teach at Pratt and Columbia University. But do you have something similar, some similar programs for high school kids, or any partnerships that you can talk about?
So we did. So the after school programs that we were working on, we did one was called Flex NYC, which was like a 3-year social justice dance residency where students basically were thinking about different social justice issues, but would use dance as a medium to express that. And then those students who participated actually after the 3 years worked with us to create basically a full-length commission that we presented as part of our opening season. And then, so that was dance-based. And then we did another social justice program that was more literary arts. So it was sort of spoken word. And so we produced an amazing anthology for students. And then again, they also worked right alongside, they got to work alongside Carrie Mae Weems, Nona Hendricks, as equal artists and creatives in developing a production also in the McCourt. And so we loved those programs. And the thing that COVID has done is we've had to make this kind of choice about, okay, we have less resources. What are the things we're going to focus on? And so it definitely was open call and these online works. And for us, what we need help with, which is why I so appreciate Josephine's question, is how do we make sure that is there curriculum that could go along with that then loops in young people? We've been talking to our friends at the Highline, like, are there, and even, Little Islands coming up that do a lot of workforce development in the neighborhood. Is there a way for us to say, those are your students that you're working with, but they can get additional opportunities here at the Shed? So we're trying to be creative, knowing that we've taken this cut, but we definitely still want to be engaging young people. And so we're just trying to think of creative ways to do that while we don't have those two kind of programs that we were doing for years.
Sounds good. Thank you. Just one quick thing. I know I jumped the queue. Hector is waiting. But one last thing that I wanted to ask you is, if there's any such information that you would want to disseminate, you can actually channel that through this task force or through the CD4. Jesse is not here right now, but feel free to email that information and we can have Jesse e-blast the information out.
That would be great.
Yeah, there might be other ways of actually spreading the word through local community centers and senior centers and whatnot. So we can take some help from CD4 as well. Hector, your hand was up, but now it's not. So are you still looking to ask a question?
I'm pretty good. I just want to say hi, Tamara.
Hi, Hector.
Anyway, thank you for your time. It was a really good presentation. We met before when Alex Poots was at the Shed at one of the events, and along with Darlene Waters. I work with Darlene Waters over there at Chelsea.
Oh, I love Darlene.
Yeah. Thank you very much for everything you do for the community. Thanks so much. And I'm glad the question I was asking was about the youth programs, and you kind of answered that when Vera asked about the high school programs and stuff.
Yeah. So, and we would actually do programs at Hudson Guild. So both the Flex NYC program and Disobey that I mentioned, we would do at Hudson Guild. And I just do also want to shout out Darlene, because it's been really great when we think about other ways that the Shed could be supportive. Is like, it's not always our stuff. So it's been really exciting to be able to work with her and help her support her in programming the block parties, the Chelsea reunion. So I always feel like when I work with her, it feels great, because I literally feel like I work for her, and it feels like I always know that I'm on the right track. So thank you, Hector.
Well, thank you.
Bell.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Hi, Tamara. How are you?
Hi. I was trying to find your square. Sorry.
Yes. I had to find my own square. So a couple of things. I just really quickly. First of all, thank you for coming. There was a meeting a few months back where we considered the project in CB10 of honoring the exonerated 5 with with an installation in Central Park at the site of the originating incident. And, you know, during that meeting, this group, this task force started to think about like, who are the allies, who are we in this community that can amplify, bring forward messages like the education portion that they're proposing for that installation. And, you know, your name came up in my head, and, you know, I'm glad we got to this point where you're coming to see us. And I do want to really quickly speak to James's point about the equity portion when it comes to artists, because I can personally speak to this, because a couple of people that I know actually were commissioned for the open call, and I participated in the short films that they made as a result of that commission, and they shared the love, right? So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't one of these like shoestrings. I mean, they had the financing in place to pursue their experimental approach to film in New York City, engage people, you know, even me as like a sort of, you know, a bit actor within this film, non-actor, but a bit, you know, participating in the limited extent I did. And they really, it really did, you know, it really was like modeling a different way instead of that, you know, the way we think about sometimes in artists' communities where it's like, you know, you have to grind in order to get some recognition, and that's the trade-off. You have to like, yeah. So I do want to speak to that and testify that that is, in fact, it's a new model that's in place, and it's in place in it's originating from our district, and of course it goes beyond our district. So thank you.
No, and I appreciate that. And it's where I go back to the equity piece is like, it's how you do the work matters. And listen, there's some projects coming up where one artist wants to add in a film component that wasn't original. And it was like, where's that money going to come from? And so like every night I'm sitting here thinking, well, how do we try to meet that need? Because we can't just do it and then someone not get paid. Like it's just, we need to really reevaluate our relationship to labor in that way. And so it means we can't do as many things, but that's okay too.
Yeah, I think the returns on stuff like that will be in the decades to come. It's you know, it's like an incubator effect in the arts world that I haven't seen, you know, to the scope and scale that it's being done at the Shed. So I appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I believe the next hand up is Chris. We can't hear you.
I'm unmuted now, so I had to unmute my phone and unmute my headphones. Welcome to the wild world of COVID year 2. So Tamara, thank you for coming back. We've missed you. It's been a long time since we've seen you on here. And I just wanted to ask whether or not the Shed, whether or not, like how many hats you're wearing, because I feel like you're wearing a government affairs hat and a community liaison hat on top of being the director for the arts program. And have you had any support internally in the past? And is there anything that we can do for you on this committee?
Is amazing. I should have recorded that. You want to say that again, Chris? No.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I'll say it again. No, you're wearing many hats. And I know that you came from BAM, and it's traditionally, it's very common for nonprofits to put the onus on the director to do government affairs work and community liaison work. You did great work at BAM. You're doing great work here, given the conditions that you were thrusted into. And is there anything that we can do to make sure that you have the proper resources so that way you're not playing point man for every community board that's interested in participating with the Shed and the programs that you're providing currently? The second question, this comes from internal insight. My old team at Vayner used to be the agency on record for Hudson Yards, the Shed, and that horrible falafel thing that people go to. And or Euro thing, neither here nor there, I hate that thing. But originally the money for social media advertising, if I'm correct, was coming out of the developer for Hudson Yards, was coming from Related, right? So are you having problems right now getting funding to put messaging out where like eyes and ears are tied down to media? So are you having trouble getting social media advertising funding and social media resources to support your projects? And are you having problems getting on board with like places at NPR or other digital mediums like podcasts to promote the things that are going on? Because when we talk about the the current expo that you have, the walking expo that you have, as it relates to the anti-Black lynchings, for which the origin of our neighborhood is given birth from. Hell's Kitchen got its name because of those lynchings, unfortunately. Like, I really want to make sure that you have everything you need that you originally had day one when you left BAM and came on. It's so incredibly important. So what can we do for you?
So thank you so much for it. You know, it's interesting because I'm like, do I answer that as like Tamara, or I answer that as like the shed rep? I mean, do we, I think, and I say this at the shed all the time, equally, we need to just be doing the work, but I also think we need to be doing a better job about what is the storytelling and not being afraid of leading with that story. And also allowing, I always love third-party advocate, like you, I mean, Josephine, she did a way better job of talking about fighting dark than I did. And even Dale is talking about, no, it's true, it's okay. I have no ego about that, about open call. We have to do a better job of really partnering to getting that word out. And when you mentioned Vayner, you know, one thing that I also fought for when we got here was thinking about intersectionality in how we just do all of our work. And that when we were deciding if you're going to be a new organization, well, who should come here? And there's a traditional art audience, and how much money do you spend here versus there? You know, what I'm concerned about is, can we believe that what the type of place the shed is, a sort of larger scale, public, nonprofit, can it actually be an intersectional space? Or do you believe that that's only reserved for a culturally specific organization? Like,
right, because if it's not intersectional, then I feel like this community is failing the shed. If the shed and your programs fail, then we here at CB4 are failing. And that's not, it's unacceptable.
Yeah. And so we fought to get a position. Now I too do I feel like I wear a lot of hats? Like, you know, we're starting our DEI process. I'm super excited formally. So I'm working on that. We're doing disability arts integration. I'm also one of the curators. Like, so there's like a lot of things happening, and we're a new organization. And so as much as I feel like, Tamara, do I even have another hour for something? How to make sure that we're advocating. And someone was asking me earlier, James, about the funding, you know, that our foundation community that supports equity work, that there's enough funding coming in, because I can't rely on just the earned revenue over tickets, because not all of my stuff sort of has ticket prices with it. And so I think how we can work together on the story, how we can work together to make sure that this place has meaning for its local community. Because, you know, I think I love that Howard Dean exhibition, and it makes me sad looking at the numbers. Now, yes, we're in the midst of a pandemic, but, you know, I can also go to other museums and I'm like, so what's happening here? And I do think we need to push through in a way, and there could be a variety of reasons. And if we weren't live on YouTube, maybe I'd even get into them about what we think that hurdle is. Is it our proximity? Is it like we also are wrestling with our own history? But I always say everything I do, I'm unapologetic in the fact that I'm like, I know what it means to be here. I'm a Black person in this field. Like, I get it, but I also believe that this space can be ours. And so how do I make sure that every person is comfortable saying that? And not everybody is. Like, I can ultimately say that this year it was unapologetically focusing on Black and brown communities, people that are super, super hurting, and really saying they matter. That's what, when we think about recovery and all those things that means, if it's not going to work for them, it's actually not going to work for any of us. How do I get everybody else to say that? You know, that's part of a challenge, but I hope this is really the first of this. I used to come more to the ACEs, and I do hope that we can get a dialogue and maybe think about, is there a bespoke programming that we do together? Or do we think about how to not only bring people to the shed, but bring the shed out more? So, and always need advocates to make sure that it's better coming from you than it is coming to me when we're trying to like talk to the Mellon Foundation.
There's a wealth of talent and knowledge here. I'm sure we'll all be willing to lend a hand if you were to do a brainstorming session with advocates.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Katie.
Hey there. So yeah, this was so lovely to hear all of the extraordinary work that you guys are doing. And I'm probably now going to be slightly contrarian because while I think it is so awesome to hear that the shed really takes care of the artists it chooses, you know, and that it makes sure that they are financially compensated in a way that helps cover their, not only just cover their costs, but really support them as artists. On a different note, I would say, you know, you referenced this a little bit earlier, you know, workforce development is so important. And especially opportunities for our youth to have internships and things. And in fact, as you probably saw on our agenda for this evening, we had invited, we wanted to be hearing about what was happening with the Summer Youth Employment Program. And we're concerned that it may not be fully funded, or who knows what's going to happen with it, but we are definitely concerned. And it is so important that there be opportunities. And I'm just wondering, obviously, I totally understand about budget cuts and everything else, but I'm just wondering, even if you don't have money for paid internships, I do think that there are students out there who it would be such an amazing opportunity if they could say, you know, if they could have a unpaid internship with the shed. It would be such a great opportunity for them.
So I have to say, I don't believe in unpaid internships. We actually did work with Summer Youth Program. So it was 2019 might have been the summer that we were able to do it. And the other thing is, you know, institutions need to be ready to meet the needs of it. So I do think like you can't not say money. When we did this at BAM, we also brought in like a social worker who would make sure that we wanted to have equitable experiences across all the different departments. And
Lovely.
so this is deep in my heart. And I do believe we have to do it right, which is why I love that it was like, how can we support the young people that are working, that are already a part of other cohorts in our neighborhood. I love that we're doing the CUNY Day with students. I do hope that we can do that program. I just want to make sure, like, you know, I used to do arts programs sometimes where you're like, you need to provide a stipend. Like there are choices that young people have to make. Summer youth program, that is money that families also depend on. So I will say that you know, if the program comes up again and we can do it, I actually think open call could be a really great way to do summer youth programs. And the other thing is, when we talk about, I both believe in, like, we need to think about pipeline into fields in arts. And so that's one thing, but there's also a lot of us here and a lot of us get overlooked. A lot of us get underpaid. And so part of it is how to make sure that the full life cycle, that someone's like, you don't just have to start with a teenager, is that we need to make sure that we're diversifying and having better representation throughout all different levels. And so huge summer youth in program. Dupe, who's the senior intersectional marketing strategist, she was so sad when they stopped that program. And I'm not sure where it is right now, but we talk to DYCD all the time. But it's reminding me to follow up, because it would be great if we could do it for open call this summer. It could be a lot of fun.
And we would love your support if it turns out that program isn't happening or is dramatically reduced as it was last year. We would love your help just thinking through what we can do for those students, you know.
And I do think this, there's a collective that's been around, we've been around for a year and a half, the West Side Cultural Network. And it's a group of, like, so it's both like the Reuben, it's the Shed, it's the Whitney, the High Line, it's a Little Island, it's the Park, and we've been thinking about how are we if there's a focus locally, how do we make sure that we are bringing all our resources? So even if the students are in one location, they're getting a very fulfilling and rich experience. So I think if it doesn't work out with summer youth, maybe that's something we could try to think about, and I could bring back to them.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tamara. I think we have one attendee who has a question. No, okay, no, I misread. All right, we good. No more questions. Tamara, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for saying no unpaid internships. I'm a strong believer of that.
No, I got to pay. Everybody's got to get paid.
Everybody's got to get paid.
Everybody's got to get paid and paid fairly.
Also quickly, I think right now you do some communication through CB4, or the shed does.
We do, but I think we're not, I mean.
I think it could be more robust.
Not at all.
And are you on the kiosks, the DOITT kiosks?
Oh, is that the link in my C one? Is that what that is? I don't know. I don't want to lie.
That could be some good outreach, because CB4 puts out some of our stuff on those kiosks as well.
I've noticed shared information on kiosks.
Okay, but maybe I'll look in to see what info we put, to see if some of the stuff that I've been talking about, I could do that.
Yeah. But if you want us to do some sort of e-blast and sort of reach out to community members within CD4, we can very easily do so. So you're always welcome to send that information to us. For now, Jesse is not here, but you already have Jesse's information, so you can reach out to him directly. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, well, I'll let you have your meeting back. Okay, bye.
Okay, so the agenda item number 4, I'm going to hand it back over to Katie to talk about Health Disparities Forum coming up on March 23rd.
Yep. So you hopefully all got the email and the notice and the flyer about the fact that our forum about health disparities was moved to next week. And we have quite a lineup, including doctors and other healthcare providers, and a deacon, a reverend from Holy Apostles. So we have both the faith community and the medical community represented, and it looks like it's going to be a very good presentation. I will say we actually saw a piece of a presentation on a similar topic that CB7 did. And one of their presenters was a doctor who actually lives in our district and teaches at Columbia. And so he is going to be one of the presenters. And anyway, we have a great group. I will say that when we switched the dates, we did lose the doctor who was going to be speaking to us about maternal mortality issues. And so we are hoping to find a replacement for that. So anyway, at the moment, we've lost the doctor who's going to speak about that, and we hope to find a replacement. But otherwise, I think it should be really good and really centered on this very important issue. And so thanks to Rose and I think Josephine and some others who'd raised this a couple months ago about the importance of focusing on this topic. And I'm glad that we've been able to pull this together. So I hope you can all make it and that you get the word out. So that would be lovely.
Just wanted to quickly add, if anyone has any suggestions, let us know.
Well, what I will add is for an OBGYN, I am waiting for a response. Someone said they are looking for coverage for that evening.
Oh.
So I'm hoping to know by tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. Lovely. So yeah, that's it, I think, on the forum, unless anybody has any questions.
I did real quick.
Chris.
Hey. So yeah, if Maria's contact doesn't pull through, there's a possibility that I can find an OBGYN who's been published or at least recently interviewed on maternal mortality.
Okay.
Like very, very quickly. Someone that's been featured in Parents Magazine.
Great. All right. Then, yeah, we'll be back in touch with you by tomorrow if we are still looking for somebody. So that's great. Thank you, Chris. That's awesome.
Okay, fast turnaround. No problem. You're welcome.
Perfect. Lovely. James?
Okay, I think that sort of brings us to.
No, I think James has a question.
Oh, James, I didn't see that. Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry. It was reported yesterday or today that a 41-year-old Asian American man was attacked on 8th and 38th, which is squarely in our district. And, you know, I'm half Korean. And so I bring up issues facing African Americans in honor of my father, and issues facing Asian Americans in honor of my mother. And you know, and just as a human being and a resident of this community, we've seen the rise of anti-Asian feeling. And I think we would be remiss as a task force if we didn't make a statement, present it to the board, and you know, have some sort of reporting from NYPD, like, you know, this is unacceptable. These are our neighbors, and you know, what are we doing here if we don't do something about it?
Yeah, James, I think that's a really important point. And actually, frankly, one thought that pops to mind, and I just don't remember. So you know how at the beginning of each full board meeting, we have one of the police precincts represented and speak to us about sort of issues facing the community. I'm wondering if it might be helpful if we reached out to them ahead of time and said, look, we'd really like you to specifically address anti-Asian, you know, hate issues and address that issue specifically for a full board.
Katie, can I just quickly jump in? I think there's this organization, I can't remember the exact name, but 1 second, I'm looking it up right now, and I'm going to tell you, Jesse had actually mentioned something else, and I actually have my email in my draft folder, which I haven't sent out. And this is about, 1 second, I'll tell you what it's called. Preventing Hate Together. The New York City Office of the Prevention of Hate Crime, OPHC. And the email that I was drafting actually is about potentially inviting someone from that organization to come and speak to us. And potentially for April meeting, because next meeting, March 30th, is pretty much Health Disparities Forum, which is pretty packed. So I think that's something that we can bring up. And if this can be discussed even prior to Social and Racial Justice Task Force meeting at the full board, I think that's a better suggestion, I think, because that's going to happen in the first week of April, right?
I'm in favor of both of those ideas. I think what Katie mentioned is really important, that, you know, it come up sooner rather than later. I think certainly having people come speak to the task force is important, but, you know, full board is where, you know, we can really sort of make a statement as a board, as an entire community. So I don't want to do one in lieu of the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, and I think that that organization that I just mentioned, they have already reached out to CD4. Katie, you might have missed that email, but they've already reached out to CD4. They're actually asking if CD4 would be interested in hosting a presentation by them. So I think we can do that at the full board meeting, and I'll draft something up, Katie, and you know, we can reach out to Jesse and see if that, because Jesse was thinking that it should probably happen within task force, but I think timing is important. So it should probably happen at both times, full board as well as the task force.
Okay, yep, we'll definitely talk. Perfect. But we will make sure that in one form or another, it does get addressed, whether it's by the police or at a different presentation at the full board if possible, James. That's an important suggestion. Dale, you have your hand up? Oh, you're muted now.
So sorry. I don't know. I've lost my common sense when it comes to this interface. I'm not familiar with the incident. James, do you have any, like, can you point us in the direction of any media coverage for the incident, just so I can familiarize myself with it? Oh, perfect. Okay, it's the New York Post. It's not my go-to, but I'll look at it.
It's just Google. It's
I
just
tend to
Google.
boycott. Okay, it's been widely covered.
This came out today.
Okay, I do think as a task force, like I think it would be, regardless of how it cycles through, whether it's at a district service cabinet meeting or if it's, was this in Midtown South? Do you know? Is it?
It says in the article it was 30. It's poorly reported. It says 8th Avenue near East 38th Street in Hell's Kitchen. 8th Avenue is not East 38th Street.
Right. That's wrong. Okay. Well, anyway, pending more information, I do think it would be constructive for the task force to put together a letter to say how we, condemn the spate of anti-Asian violence and, line up some resources to address it within our community. So I would be on board with that, whether it gets, whether a draft begins now and goes to the full board later or what have you.
And for the record, I'm not a subscriber to the New York Post. I'm sure there are.
I'm not impugning your character because of the link you provided. Oh, and by the way, James, Mike McCabe says hello.
Oh my gosh! Tell him hi.
He saw I posted that image of us, and he said, "I know that guy." So Mike McCabe says hello.
Don't believe a word he says. Sorry.
He was very kind, and thank you for the link, even though it's the Post.
So I think a letter could be a great idea. I'm just wondering about the timing. I mean, I guess we could draft it and circulate it and get people's comments on it and try and do that before the executive committee meeting. So, yeah.
We did such a thing when the gentleman came in from Maryland and murdered a member of our community in the first domestic terrorist act during the Trump administration. So a letter like this is not uncommon.
Okay.
Katie.
Sounds good.
Predates my time, so I don't know the letter, but we can look it up.
Are you up for drafting, James? Yeah, if you want, bounce it off of some of us and we'll, yeah.
No problem. Happy to do it.
Sounds good. Well, agenda for next meeting is already sort of in the works, and I think it'll be circulated once the speakers are confirmed.
Yep. And that's just our sort of intro meeting, as it were. So our forum is next week on Tuesday. Yep. And we will get the full list out as soon as we have everybody confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll have somebody from CYCD next time.
We're hoping so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we even wondered if, should we write a letter now saying like how important we think this program is, and we want to make sure that it, and we'd really like somebody to come speak to it. I mean, I know that ACEs wrote a letter last year in June, and maybe we can partner up with them or something.
Probably we should piggyback because I think it's pretty obvious that they probably don't have much to say because there's no funding. So they don't want to come and sort of present something.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know that there's no funding, but we suspect that there's very little funding for them. Yeah.
I think they're avoiding us for sure.
Exactly.
That's the feeling like everyone gets. I think.
Yeah.
I think we should be ready.
Josephine might be right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is our guess.
That's frustrating.
But Josephine, do you have any thoughts? I'm from ACES because I know you'd helped write the letter last year.
Yeah, I think Kit did the letter, but they didn't even respond to the letter. I think their hands are tied, sort of like everyone else's. But what I really wanted to ask them was, how can more companies sign up to do this work if they wanted to, right? Maybe we could be sort of a gateway to putting them together with some organization, but I can't even get a hold of them even to ask that question.
Yeah.
So it would be very helpful if they would just show up and, we're not, nobody's calling them out on anything. The budgets are what they are. but this could be a way of getting more companies to participate, at least getting them at the table. Because what I've found overall is that the workforce development for 18 to 24-year-olds with no college degree, there's just not a whole lot. Nobody's doing a whole lot at all. And I've just been going in circles, basically trying to find companies that will get involved in this work. And a lot of companies don't want to take on interns because they don't have the proper staff. And there's all kinds of things that SYEP has already set up.
Yeah.
Like they know how to deal with DACA. You have to have a physical before you come in. There are all kinds of measures that have to happen before interns begin work. And they've already figured a lot of that out. So, to me, it would just be a matter of, this would be actually something that could help companies too. Companies who want to get involved and don't necessarily want to take all this complex work, that happens when you need to hire an intern. SYEP has already done it.
So are you suggesting, Josephine, sort of like that you think that private companies would like donate money to support SYEP?
Well, they could. I don't know if they're going to donate money, but say, for instance, if a company wanted to hire interns to do work, SYEP has already set up a program of how to do that because they work with organizations. That's how they place people, right? So how do we broaden that net and invite more companies to do this work? So I don't think they're actually going. I don't think companies will actually pay for that. But on one of my calls with Facebook, they haven't opened their campus here yet. But one program that they are doing, they have a pilot program in I think 2 other states where they are actually paying small business owners. Facebook is not hiring the interns or the workers, but they're paying small business owners to actually hire workers that they need. And then that's how these workers get paid, because they know that small businesses are hurting. And so how do they support small businesses and young people or interns at the same time? So it's a program that they've just launched. They're not too far into it. I'm sort of trying to stay on top, just figure out how this thing is going. And, I'll continue to engage with them. But right now, there's just nothing that's really set up for young people in the way that SYEP is. That's why this program is just so important. I mean, I knew it was important before, but after all these calls, now I know that it's really crucial to keep this program going. And as you mentioned earlier, Katie, I know that, you want people to have experience. You were talking about, non-paid internships at the Shed. And while that's great and everything, what ends up happening is that kids who, don't necessarily need the funds end up taking those internships, whereas kids mainly who really need the money, which is most of our Black and brown youth in this city, don't end up taking those internships. And then it's a just cycle that continues and it's very hard to break. So
no, absolutely. And so we would have to be very careful that, my goal is, look, if the SYEP isn't happening and there are very few jobs available, could we at least get some kids some experience if their only other choice is nothing, right? But I certainly don't mean to be keeping them out of, my God, to be giving this to an opportunity just to kids who don't need the money. That is not the goal. And you're right. Like, of course, there are risks associated with it. I get it. But I'm with you. I think this SYEP is so important, and I don't know how we can help.
Can I add on to something that Josephine was saying?
Mm-hmm.
I do think like a lot of these large companies, did some like marquee announcements last year in the wake of George Floyd's killing and the movement for Black Lives Matter, to say that we're going to do more, we're going to do better, we're going to invest this much. Comcast is one example. They actually have active programming where they're really doing some of the things that Josephine was talking about with like hires within like supporting small business hires, for instance. But, some of these companies now have like somebody who's in charge of this budget but not necessarily the wherewithal to spend effectively. So maybe there are some opportunities to say, like, this is a program that we really need, and this could be your company jumping in and and raising the stakes on equity in our community. So I think there's a pitch there to be, it's not for me to make because I don't have that access, but I think there is a pitch to be made to some of these companies that have stakes in the neighborhood, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
What about some of the foundations and such that may have funds?
I haven't gotten to that yet, to be honest with you, Leslie.
Okay.
I haven't gotten to that. I was trying to go where the money was first. I was following that trail, and then it just dropped off. These companies have very set ideas of what they want and expectations. And, you have to have taken so many STEM classes. You have to have a certain GPA. You've got to have all this criteria. And the reality is that the kids that we're trying to help, or the young people we're trying to help, they, this is where this is the most needed. I mean, obviously you're going to get the other kids with the high GPAs or whatever, you're going to get them anyway. But, in order to really work on issues of equity, then these companies really need to address these populations, and they're not doing that. So the question is how do you do that? How do you bring them to the table?
And it's interesting, I saw a grant opportunity that turns out it doesn't apply to our district, but so bummer. But it made me think, like, if it did apply to our district, like, wouldn't it be great if there was money available that then there could be a program, even if SYEP big time, big picture doesn't happen, like, could kids be hired or paid to then go work for not-for-profits this summer, right, in our district? Like,
right.
Wouldn't that be awesome, right? So it's sort of like your small business program, but instead for not-for-profits, like, hey, big companies, would you pay into this fund for Black and brown youth to go get paid experience working and doing good work for these nonprofits that are doing good work, something.
I actually think that they may do that. I mean, that sounds, I'm going to look up what Dale was talking about, Comcast, and trying to find out more about that, because I think that, sometimes these companies want to do something, but
they don't know how to do it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's complicated with the whole intern. There's a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
So they just, they don't have the wherewithal. So they're not going
Just to clarify, I think Comcast is actually an example of a company that knows what they want to do with their money. But I do think there are other, and there's somebody I was talking to about this who may have some ins, and if I find something, I'll send it your way, that there are companies that made these marquee announcements, but don't have the infrastructure or the personnel, the effective personnel to implement
to supervise and to
roll it out, to implement it. Yeah.
Microsoft actually has a fantastic program. The problem with them is that it's a grants program, so people have to apply, and it's organizations that apply. And currently, I don't remember exactly, but some $20 million grant was offered to this youth-run artist community in Brownsville. But they're very particular that people had to apply for it, and then they had to show that they actually deserve to collect that money. So it's not like an internship program, but what Josephine is suggesting, I think more than the bigger companies, smaller companies are always looking to funnel them whatever is required for corporate social responsibility. So very often they don't have internal programs, nor do they have the infrastructure to run them. So they end up paying that money to different organizations so that they kind of check that off their list that they've done their part. And if city has a program where they can reach out to those companies and collect those funds, so there has to be some sort of, I think that what I'm trying to say is that a mechanism should be in place that can tap into companies' needs instead of going to them and begging for it. Show them a way that here is where you can actually channel your money and help communities that you really want to help. Otherwise, you're actually paying that as if you're paying taxes and you're done with it.
And that's why we need to have we need to have SYEP on here, because that's part of what they do, you know, so they have a model. And
so I think why don't we write to them and we propose something of that nature, that listen, there might be a mechanism that they can think about, because they have the infrastructure to collect this money.
Yeah, and that we would be happy to help suggest. I mean, maybe Josephine, what we can at least do, you know, Jesse was the one doing the reach out to them, and we can maybe see if Jesse can say to them, we're not asking you here so that we can attack you for not having this program. We actually have some ideas that we think would be helpful, and we want to help. We're not here to criticize.
Yes, I agree.
So, yeah, I will. I'll reach out to Jesse and just see if he can try again to get somebody to come and to reassure them that we're here with creative, constructive ideas, not attacking. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing we could do too, just thinking about, we must know somebody that knows somebody. I mean, thinking about like our elected reps or our elected officials, they must know people at DYCD too, or whoever is in charge of SYEP.
I have a contact.
Okay, so let me do this. Let me reach out to Jesse and see if he thinks he can, you know, through his ways do it. But if that doesn't work, we'll go a different route.
Chris, that means you.
Exactly, Chris.
Listen, I was smart and saved my city council Rolodex, so yeah, anything I can do to help.
That's the way you do
Very
it.
good. All right. Well, I'm mindful of the time. So anything else for right now?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Then hopefully we will see you all next Tuesday for our Health Disparities Forum. All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.